Welcome. Today we are undertaking an extensive examination of one of the most shocking and tragic events in recent Australian history.
We are.
We're looking at the Wieambilla shootings that occurred on the 12th of December, 2022, in rural Queensland. This was an ambush that resulted in the senseless deaths of two serving officers, constables Matthew Arnold and Rachel McCrow, and an innocent civilian neighbor, Alan Dare.
It was a profound loss.
We're approaching this material with the utmost seriousness today, really driven by the desire to understand the facts and the complexities surrounding this devastating event.
That gravity is paramount. Our sources compel us to move beyond just the initial news reports and really conduct a forensic examination of the timeline, the deeply disturbing background of the perpetrators, the Train family, and most critically, the profound conflict between how the police first classified it and what the law eventually decided.
That's the key point, isn't it? The initial assessment versus the final finding.
It is. The police initially called it terrorism, but the final coronial inquest pointed toward a shared delusional disorder. And for everyone impacted, especially the families of Constables Arnold and McCrow and Mr. Dare, we want to extend our deepest sympathies. The material we're covering is challenging, but understanding the nuances is essential to learning from this tragedy.
Absolutely. The tension inherent in this case is what makes it such a vital subject for our analysis. You have an attack that was, it was clearly premeditated, it was targeted, and executed with military precision against representatives of the state.
All the hallmarks of what you might initially think is terrorism.
Exactly. But then the legal finding pivots to a severe shared mental illness. Our mission today is to explore the source material, to illuminate that crucial distinction for you, to try and understand how ideology and psychosis converged in such a lethal way. So let's begin by grounding ourselves in the location and the context that brought the police to the Train's door in the first place. Wieambilla is an incredibly remote locality. It's situated roughly 270 kilometers northwest of Brisbane. This wasn't a raid in a crowded suburb. This was a routine call to a property tucked away deep in the bush.
Correct, and that call was, far from high stakes initially. It was a welfare check requested by New South Wales Police regarding Nathaniel Train.
And Nathaniel wasn't some unknown figure. He had a professional background.
A very professional one. He was a former principal, held leadership positions at schools like Walgett Community College Primary School and Yorkeys Knob State School. This is important context, I think.
Why is that?
Because these were professionals who had consciously, deliberately retreated from society. He hadn't made contact with anyone since October 9th, 2022, and his estranged second wife, who filed the report on December 4, was naturally concerned.
But the officers who went out there, they weren't just checking if Nathaniel was home and okay. Their mandate was layered, which suggests to me that authorities already had some escalating concerns about the family.
Precisely. The responding officers had multiple objectives. Beyond the immediate welfare check, they were also following up on an outstanding warrant for Nathaniel.
A warrant for what?
It was related to a December 2021 weapons dumping incident, and there was an additional issue concerning a state border breach. So there were red flags.
And more than that, there was active hostility coming from the property before the police even got there.
Yes. The estranged wife who filed the missing person report had subsequently been deluged with threatening and, frankly, vicious messages, specifically from Gareth Train, Nathaniel's brother. So you have a situation where the officers are attending a location where one occupant, Gareth, had already demonstrated hostility and made direct threats. The air of volatility was thick before they ever arrived.
That sets the stage perfectly for the ideological world the Trains inhabited. Gareth Train in particular was not just eccentric, he was a deeply entrenched and active conspiracy theorist online.
Oh, very much so.
What specific elements of this worldview were critical to his anti-authority stance?
What's fascinating here, and also deeply disturbing, is the sheer extremity and the public nature of Gareth's views. He wasn't hiding them at all. He was an established and aggressive participant in Australian conspiracy theory forums and websites.
And what was he espousing?
He was actively pushing a cocktail of dangerous views. Virulent anti-government, anti-police, and particularly anti-vaccine sentiments. But central to this entire mix was his adherence to the sovereign citizen movement.
Okay, for our listeners, we really need to unpack that. What does the sovereign citizen ideology actually entail, and why is it so inherently dangerous when it intersects with law enforcement?
The sovereign citizen movement is globally recognized as a high-risk group by many, many law enforcement agencies. At its core, it's an ideology where adherents believe that existing government structures, laws, taxation, and especially judicial systems are illegitimate.
They just reject it all.
They reject it all as fraudulent. They often claim they are only bound by some form of, natural or common law, not the modern state. For the Trains, and particularly for Gareth, this meant they viewed the police not as officers of the law, but as criminal agents of an illegitimate entity.
It's a complete rejection of the state.
It is, and it provides the ultimate justification for resisting, or in this case, violently ambushing, any interaction with authorities.
And the beliefs Gareth held weren't just anti-government. They were truly fantastic and conspiratorial in scope. The sources give us some incredibly extreme examples.
They do. They reveal a mind steeped in absolute persecutory delusion. For instance, take the Port Arthur Massacre, a watershed moment in Australian history that led to the National Firearms Agreement and incredibly strict gun control.
Right, a defining moment.
Gareth claimed this pivotal event was a false flag operation. He believed it was specifically manufactured by the government to disarm the Australian population. This belief directly informs their subsequent actions and their stockpiling of weapons.
It's a foundational belief for them then.
Absolutely. He also held beliefs about high-profile assassinations, claiming, for instance, that Princess Diana was killed in a blood sacrifice. These weren't political disagreements. They were elaborate, internally consistent narratives of widespread, dark conspiracies designed to oppress them personally.
It really sounds like a shared feedback loop within the family unit was reinforcing these extreme ideas.
That's the critical component. Pastor Ronald Train, who is the father of Gareth and Nathaniel, provided some deeply insightful commentary on this dynamic after the event.
What did he say?
He described Gareth as being obsessed with guns and weapons, volatile and controlling. And crucially, he noted that Nathaniel shared this obsession, but to a lesser degree.
So Gareth was the primary driver.
It seems so. What we see developing is a shared ideological bunker. The brothers, Gareth and Nathaniel, along with Gareth's wife, Stacy, who, in a complicated family dynamic, had previously been married to Nathaniel.
All three of them.
All three. All had professional backgrounds as teachers, but all resigned. Nathaniel in 2020 and Gareth and Stacy in 2021, suggesting a conscious, organized retreat from mainstream society, fueled by the shared intensifying animosity toward any form of authority. They were armed, they were isolated, and they were radicalized together.
Let's pivot now from the static analysis of their beliefs to the dynamic, minute-by-minute reality of December 12, 2022. That afternoon, 4 young constables, Matthew Arnold, Rachel McCrow, Randall Kirk, and Keely Brow, drove out from their stations in Tara and Chinchilla.
In 2 separate police vehicles.
They were attending what should have been, at worst, a difficult conversation, not a military engagement.
The officers arrived at the lock gate around 4:35 p.m. They followed protocol for a remote property where the occupant was potentially missing. They tried to make contact by honking the horn.
And got no response.
No response at all. Recognizing the need to continue their welfare check, they parked their vehicles, climbed over the fence, and began walking up the long dirt driveway toward the house. This moment is so critical.
Because they were completely exposed.
Utterly exposed. On foot. And relying on the basic assumption that they were encountering disgruntled citizens, maybe, but not prepared killers. Their body-worn cameras captured the absolute horror that followed.
The source material makes it so clear. This was not a confrontation. This was a meticulously planned ambush.
Absolutely. The timeline is just chillingly fast. At 4:37 p.m., that's just 2 minutes after they met at the gate and started walking, the attack began without a single word of warning.
No communication.
None. The perpetrators, Gareth and Nathaniel, opened fire instantly, and they were utilizing high-powered hunting rifles, specifically a .308 Winchester Ruger M77 and a .3006 Springfield Tikka T3 rifle.
These are not small arms.
Not at all. Nathaniel Train fired the first shot, and it was devastatingly accurate. He fatally wounded Constable Arnold in the chest from a staggering distance of approximately 120 meters away from the front gate.
120 meters.
Yes. That is the distance of a professional, prepared sniper.
That initial distance immediately eliminates any notion of self-defense or a spontaneous confrontation. They were positioned for maximum effect. And the attack then immediately turned into something even more horrific.
It did. Constable McCrow, seeing her partner fall, instantly dropped to the ground, but she was critically wounded almost immediately, taking fire to her back and legs. Despite being so grievously injured, the footage reveals her incredible bravery.
What did she do?
She desperately tried to radio for help, but the chaos of the situation made effective communication impossible. In her final moments, the body-worn camera captured her recording a final, desperate message for her family,
Oh,
while simultaneously, and this is a detail that shows immense courage, emptying her police-issue Glock pistol in a desperate attempt to fend off Gareth Train.
the fact that she was trying to defend herself and record a farewell message at the same time it speaks to a moment of utter horror and clarity. And she was then killed at close range.
Yes. The confrontation ended at 4:46 p.m., less than 10 minutes after they jumped that fence. Gareth Train approached her position and fatally shot her at close range. The speed, the violence, the cold-blooded nature of the assault, it was overwhelming.
And they didn't just leave, they had a purpose.
A very grim calculation. The perpetrators then walked up to the bodies and stole the Glock pistols from both Constables Arnold and McCrow. They were clearly acquiring more resources for the impending siege.
We have to pause here and consider the immense psychological toll on the two surviving officers, Constables Kirk and Bro. Constable Kirk managed to escape, but it was a desperate dash for his life.
It was. After McCrow was killed, Kirk fired one shot at Gareth, which missed. Recognizing the overwhelming tactical disadvantage, he made a split-second decision to run 100 meters back to his vehicle.
And he was under fire the whole way.
He was shot in the hip as he fled, but managed to reach his car, drive away, and get to safety to coordinate a response. Meanwhile, Constable Bro, who had taken cover in nearby bushland, remained hidden, undiscovered by the attackers.
Constable Bro's ordeal, hiding in the grass, knowing her colleagues had just been executed, must have been unimaginably terrifying.
Her experience is documented by her mobile phone call to 000, which she made at 4:44 p.m., and she stayed hidden for hours. The source material tells us she often had to whisper to the police operator.
Why?
Because Nathaniel and Gareth were moving so close to her position as they searched for her. The perpetrators were deliberately trying to flush her out. They set a massive grass fire.
To find her.
Exactly. Specifically aiming to locate her and also to incinerate the police vehicle that belonged to Arnold and McCrow. She told the operator, whispering that she thought she was going to die. This was an experience of absolute isolation, pinned down by killers who were actively hunting her while her environment burned around her.
And as if the tragedy wasn't complete, it expanded to include a neighbor, Alan Dare. This raises profound questions about communication failure during a rapidly escalating critical incident.
Alan Dare was a selfless man. He was 58. Around 5:30 p.m., he and another neighbor, Victor Lewis, saw the smoke billowing from the train's property.
The smoke from the fire they set to find Constable Bro?
That's the one. They saw the smoke and heard the distant gunfire. They acted on a purely human instinct to investigate and to help. The tragic failure, occurred immediately prior to their departure. Dare's wife, Carrie, had called 000 twice, at 5:13 p.m. and 5:17 p.m., asking about the smoke and potential fire risk.
And the operator failed to provide the most critical piece of information.
Precisely. The operator advised Mrs. Dare against investigating, which was good advice, but critically, they failed to relay the active, immediate threat that 2 police officers had been ambushed and executed, and the area was now a live killing field.
If she had known that.
Had Mrs. Dare known the true danger, it is highly likely she would have prevented her husband from leaving. Unaware of the danger, Alan Dare proceeded. He was shot fatally in the back by one of the perpetrators while attempting to record video on his mobile phone to document the scene.
And his neighbor.
His neighbor, Victor Lewis, fled unharmed and was the one to alert the responding officers that his friend had been shot. This speaks to the inherent risk civilians face when a domestic, localized incident suddenly escalates into a prepared, violent ambush.
The immediate reaction from the Queensland Police Service was, it was an extraordinary act of courage. 16 local general duties officers arrived on the scene, and despite the overwhelming danger, they made the tactical decision not to wait for the specialist teams.
That decision was both heroic and vital. Their priority was twofold: recovering their fallen colleagues and rescuing Constable Bro, who was still hiding and whispering on the phone.
How did they even manage the extraction under fire?
They utilized Alan Dare's Ford Territory SUV, the very vehicle he had driven in just before being killed, as a makeshift shield to extract the bodies of Constables Arnold and McCrow, all while taking intermittent fire from the house.
And they had to get Constable Bro out.
The coordination with her 000 operator was key. At 6:34 p.m., she heard the specific code words, pink and blue, used by the operator, which confirmed that friendly forces were near the front gate. and she just made a desperate run for it and successfully reached safety.
So while the local officers were completing this incredibly dangerous rescue, the perpetrators, the trains, they transitioned into actively broadcasting their twisted narrative.
This is a crucial piece of evidence, and it's what supported that initial terrorism assessment. Around 7:31 p.m., Gareth and Stacy were seen outside the residence recording a video. This wasn't a desperate last stand. It was a deliberate act of propaganda.
Where did they post it?
They posted this footage to YouTube under their middle names, Daniel and Jane, and they also uploaded it to a known conspiracy site. Gareth chillingly stated, "They came to kill us, we killed them," and he deliberately referred to the police as devils and demons.
He's connecting his ideology directly to the violence.
Directly, they were trying to send a message to their online community.
By 7:40 p.m., the Special Emergency Response Team CERT had arrived. Now, for our listeners, CERT is the Queensland Police Service's top-tier tactical response unit, equipped for these high-risk situations.
And they arrived with significant resources, including an armored vehicle, a Bearcat.
The Bearcat.
It stands for Ballistic Engineered Armored Response Counterattack Truck. It's essentially a mobile fortress, an armored personnel carrier used for officer protection during sieges.
So they were ready for a serious fight.
They were. CERT officers immediately surrounded the property and began negotiation attempts. They used the Bearcat's loud hailer to plead with the trains, emphasizing that the situation, doesn't have to be this way. But the trains were fully committed to confrontation.
We need to understand the tactical challenge the trains presented. The sources mention military-style defenses. What did that entail, and how were they able to hold off a team like CERT for so long?
The trains were clearly prepared for this exact outcome. They had established fortifications, including log barricades and firing positions that gave them excellent sight lines of the only approach, that long driveway, and they were heavily armed with those high-powered rifles, not just handguns.
Giving them significant range and power.
Significant range and stopping power against regular police vehicles, and even a challenge for the armored ones. When the Bearcat was driven up the driveway, Gareth and Nathaniel immediately engaged it. They fired directly at the armored windscreen, close to the driver's position, demonstrating an absolute intent to incapacitate the tactical team.
Which forced the Bearcat to pull back.
It forced it to retreat temporarily. This sustained, high-intensity resistance is not typical for a spontaneous confrontation. It speaks to their training and their absolute commitment to die fighting.
And the siege lasted for hours, with intermittent fire.
That's right. Gareth continued to fire, even taking shots at a police helicopter that was providing observation, until about 10:04 p.m. Nathaniel was pinned near a log barricade, and Stacy was inside the house, but the threat remained constant.
So they tried to approach again.
The Bearcat attempted to approach again after the firing subsided at 10:05 p.m., but Nathaniel immediately responded by firing at it again, forcing another retreat. The police had to operate with extreme caution due to the train's preparation and their ruthlessness.
What ultimately brought the standoff to an end?
The final breach was executed at 10:29 p.m. CERT officers used the Bearcat to breach the perimeter, supported by 2 police helicopters providing crucial real-time observation from above. The confrontation was short and decisive once the tactical team committed to entering the property. By 10:39 p.m., all 3 perpetrators were fatally shot by CERT officers.
Can you detail the sequence of their death for us?
Of course. Gareth Train was the first to be killed as he was actively attempting to reload his weapon. Stacy then reemerged from the house, fired a single shot from her rifle, and was subsequently killed.
And Nathaniel?
Nathaniel, critically, was killed while using one of the stolen weapons Constable Arnold's Glock pistol, firing it at the Bearcat. This final act highlights the symbolic and practical significance of their theft earlier. They were using the very weapons they had stripped from their victims in their final defense against the state they despised. Before we move into the clinical analysis of the motive, we must give due recognition to the profound human cost of this event. Constables Matthew Arnold and Rachel McCrow were not just statistics. They were individuals, incredibly young in their careers.
So young.
Arnold was 26, having been sworn in just 2 years prior in March 2020. McCrow was 29, sworn in June 2021. They really represented the future of community policing, and their lives were brutally extinguished doing their duty.
And Alan Dare, the neighbor, was 58. A good Samaritan who paid the ultimate price for his concern. He epitomizes that community spirit that so often exists in remote areas, only to be betrayed by this sudden targeted violence.
His actions were truly heroic, and the response from the government and the community was, I think, commensurate with the shock and tragedy. Both Constables Arnold and McCrow were posthumously awarded the National Police Service Medal, the National Medal, the Queensland Police Service Medal, and the Queensland Police Valor Medal.
And Mr. Dare was also honored.
He was. Alan Dare was also recognized for his selflessness, receiving a posthumous Queensland Police Bravery Medal. The country recognized that these lives were lost due to an unprecedented attack on civil order.
The emotional response from leaders underscored how deeply this pierced the national psyche, especially given Australia's historically strict approach to gun violence following Port Arthur.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called it a devastating day. The reaction was deeply personal for many, including opposition leader Peter Dutton, a former police officer himself, who became visibly emotional when addressing the condolence motion in Parliament.
It's a reminder of the danger.
It reinforced the inherent danger faced by all first responders, even during seemingly routine welfare checks.
We also saw significant symbolic tributes across the country.
Yes. State flags were lowered, and iconic structures across Queensland, including the Story Bridge in Brisbane and even the Sydney Opera House in New South Wales, were illuminated in blue and white to honor the fallen.
And the property itself.
The Queensland Police Union made a significant, very concrete gesture by announcing plans to purchase the Wieambilla property itself. Their stated intent was to convert the site into a permanent memorial and, crucially, prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, a clear acknowledgement of the site's association with extreme ideology and violence.
Finally, we must acknowledge the immediate survivors of that day.
Constables Kirk and Brough, both 28, who endured that ordeal, survived, though Constable Kirk required surgery for his injuries. It's also important to note the disturbing side effect of the tragedy. 2 men were arrested and charged with unlawful trespass and stealing by looting on the train's property just 6 days after the incident, trying to profit from the devastation.
Now we arrive at the core analytical tension of this entire investigation. Initially, the police were quite clear. This was a terrorist attack. In February 2023, the Queensland Police Service officially classified it as such.
This initial assessment was powerful and deliberate. Deputy Police Commissioner Tracy Linford stated that the attack was not random or spontaneous and was executed a religiously motivated terrorist attack. The QPS determined the trains were religious extremists adhering to what is known as premillennialism, a broad Christian fundamentalist belief system.
Okay, let's explain what premillennialism means in this context. This theological concept, but how did it translate into violent, immediate action against the police?
Premillennialism is an eschatological belief. It's found within some Christian fundamentalist groups concerning the end times. Adherents believe Christ will return before a 1,000-year golden age, the millennium, and that the world will first descend into a period of tribulation.
So chaos and destruction.
Wars, plagues, governmental corruption, all of it. For the trains, particularly Gareth, their interpretation merged this traditional religious prophecy with their sovereign citizen conspiracy theories. They saw the government and the police as agents of this final evil, corrupt system, the devils and demons Gareth spoke of in his propaganda video.
So the violence was justified in their minds.
It was justified in their minds as an act of preemptive religious purification and self-defense against what they saw as the imminent apocalypse. This classification, Australia's first fundamentalist Christian terrorist attack, was based on that clear ideological targeting of state representatives with the aim of advancing a religious or political cause.
The initial terrorism classification has immense legal and intelligence implications. But 2 years later, the coronial inquest, led by coroner Terry Ryan, concluded in November 2025 with a completely different finding, and it dramatically shifted the legal and psychological interpretation of the event.
This is the pivotal moment for our analysis. Coroner Ryan explicitly ruled that the shootings did not meet the statutory definition of a terrorist act under the Commonwealth Criminal Code.
Why not?
Because the core requirement for terrorism is the intent to coerce, intimidate, or influence a government or the public. The coroner found the train's motivation was not coercive, but purely reactive and driven by internal psychological distress.
So, if it wasn't terrorism, what was the primary driver of the violence, according to the coroner?
The determination was severe mental illness, specifically a shared delusional disorder, or what clinicians sometimes call folie à deux.
Shared delusion.
Yes. The coroner, relying on extensive psychiatric evidence, found the trio were psychotically unwell and driven by their beliefs and were primarily intent on dying. They were not trying to send a political message to a wider audience. They were fighting demons in a perceived apocalyptic final battle that existed only in their minds.
Let's define folie à deux, or shared delusional disorder. How does this clinically explain the actions of three separate individuals?
Folie à deux is a rare psychiatric syndrome where a delusion, a false, unshakable belief, is transmitted from one dominant individual to one or more others with whom they share a close association, often in extreme isolation.
So Gareth was the source.
In this case, it's believed Gareth was likely the dominant source, and Nathaniel and Stacy absorbed and reinforced his severe persecutory beliefs. They truly believed the government was evil and that the police officers attending their property were literal demonic entities sent to kill them. It was a closed loop of absolute psychosis, fueled by isolation and external conspiracy theories that justified immediate lethal action.
This shift in the finding has massive ramifications. I mean, if the violence looked, acted, and was targeted like terrorism, what crucial element was missing that allowed the coroner to completely change the finding?
The missing element was the audience and the objective. A terrorist act targets the state to influence policy or coerce the population through fear. The train's objective, according to the coroner, was purely personal and fatalistic, to fight their persecutors and die trying.
So it was an internal battle, not an external one.
Precisely. If they had survived, their defense would likely have been one of insanity, not political martyrdom. The violence was an expression of their psychosis, not a strategy for political change. This means the violence was wholly inward-looking, not outward-looking towards society.
The coroner also reviewed the police actions surrounding the welfare check itself. Was there any finding that suggested police procedure was deficient, or that this tragedy could have been avoided?
Coroner Ryan was very clear on this point. The shootings were not foreseeable. He noted the incident's wholly unexpected and unprecedented nature, concluding that even if there had been better information sharing between the NSW and Queensland police about Nathaniel's warrants, it would not have prevented the instantaneous, planned ambush driven by a psychotic break.
That's an incredibly difficult conclusion.
It is, because it essentially argues that no amount of standard police work could have prepared them for individuals driven by such an internal, non-rational delusion.
But despite finding the event unforeseeable, the inquest did lead to important policy recommendations aimed at preventing similar incidents where delusion and armament intersect.
He issued 10 recommendations in total. 2 were particularly salient given the motive findings.
Which were?
First, he urged the state government to increase funding to specialist threat assessment centers. This is an acknowledgement that we need better resources to monitor individuals or groups exhibiting potentially violent, ideologically fueled behavior, whether it's politically motivated or psychotically driven.
And the second?
The second, and perhaps more controversial, was the recommendation to consider introducing mandatory mental health assessments for individuals applying for or renewing firearms licenses. This acknowledges that serious mental illness, especially when combined with high-powered weaponry, creates an unacceptable risk that must be addressed through licensing reforms.
The radicalization of the trains clearly didn't happen in a vacuum, even out in rural Queensland. The internet provided the echo chamber, and that echo chamber we now know stretched all the way across the Pacific.
That's right. The investigation into their online activity uncovered a definitive international component. In December of 2023, a U.S. citizen named Donald Day Jr. was arrested in Arizona in connection with the shootings.
What was his connection?
This arrest revealed a pattern of ideological exchange. Between May 2021 and the day of the ambush in December 2022, Day is alleged to have been sending the trains specific Christian end-of-days ideological messages. He was essentially feeding the very premillennialist paranoia that fueled their attack.
And his involvement wasn't just historical correspondence. He was actively affirming their violence in real time, wasn't he?
He was. Prosecutors allege that Day commented on that propaganda video that the trains posted to YouTube shortly after they had ambushed and killed the officers. This act suggests he was celebrating or endorsing their violence, reinforcing their deadly delusion from thousands of miles away.
And there were more charges.
Yes. Following his initial arrest, prosecutors added further charges against Day in January 2024, including illegal possession of a firearm as a convicted felon and threatening FBI agents at the time of his apprehension. This really highlights the dangers posed by the transnational network of conspiracy theorists who encourage violent acts against authority.
Beyond the international investigation, the Wieambilla tragedy had an immediate and practical impact on national policy within Australia, specifically reviving a long-stalled piece of gun control legislation.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made it very clear that the nature of the attack, the use of high-powered rifles, and the military-style defensive preparation underscored critical gaps in the country's weapons management systems. The tragedy served as a brutal reminder of the consequences of information failure regarding firearms ownership.
And this led directly to a landmark agreement by the National Cabinet.
It did. In December 2023, the National Cabinet, which comprises the Prime Minister and all state and territory leaders, committed to implementing a national firearms register. The sources deem this to be the most significant improvement in Australia's firearms management systems in almost 30 years.
Why is this particular register so significant, especially after the country already has such strong gun laws?
Well, Australia's gun laws are notoriously strict following the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. However, coordinating the actual registration and transfer of firearms across state borders has historically been fragmented.
A patchwork system.
Exactly. The lack of a single, comprehensive, real-time national register meant law enforcement couldn't always immediately access accurate information on who owned what and where. The National Firearms Register aims to consolidate all this data, finally fulfilling a long outstanding reform that originated in the wake of the 1996 tragedy.
So Wieambilla provided the final push.
The Wieambilla tragedy, therefore, provided the necessary political impetus to finally bridge that information gap, aiming to ensure first responders and communities have the best possible situational awareness regarding armed individuals. Our analysis confirms that the Wieambilla tragedy sits at a complex, lethal intersection. You have extreme social isolation, the availability of powerful weaponry, and a severe mental illness manifesting as a shared delusion rooted in anti-authority, conspiracy-laden ideology.
And the formal conclusion is the key.
The formal conclusion of the coronial inquest is arguably the most critical insight we can draw from the sources. It forces authorities to grapple with violence that appears politically motivated but is clinically driven by severe psychosis. The response to true terrorism involving intelligence agencies and counter-radicalisation efforts is vastly different from the response required for folio do, which demands mental health interventions and tighter control over access to lethal means for those experiencing persecutory delusion.
It raises a profoundly difficult question for you, the listener, to consider moving forward. Given that the final legal findings determined the violence was driven by a shared delusional disorder rather than statutory terrorism, how should law enforcement, intelligence services, and mental health agencies pivot their preparedness? How do they identify and manage violence fueled by extreme persecution complexes and online radicalization when that violence specifically falls outside the traditional legal definitions of political terrorism? This blurred line between ideology and genuine psychosis is the challenge this tragedy leaves behind. Thank you for engaging in this extensive examination of the source material.
Thanks for listening.